Greetings family. Glad that you are here with me today. This tutorial will help you maximize your understanding about diabetes and the pancreas. Now hopefully you are listening pretty closely. This is a very serious topic where there is an epidemic that is growing in our community and is taking over 75% of the diabetic lives due to heart disease. Now we know that heart disease is the #1 cause of death in the United States. So we're talking about life or death right now. And I don't like to use the word disease. Disease is simply the imbalance of cellular respiration. Now when we're talking about diabetes, I know that you know someone that is either hyperglycemic or hypoglycemic, or somebody that has to inject insulin almost every day. Now, diabetes is the imbalance of our sugar metabolism, or where they become sensitive or they become resistant, or they have to not make insulin at all. Now, we're talking about the main two types. Now, type 1, type 2, but we also know that there's little subtitles in the midst of it, like neuropathy or retinopathy, mellitus, but we're only going to talk about these main two. Now, before I go any further, we need to know what insulin is. Now, insulin is a hormone that is released from the pancreas, and it is used to allow the blood sugar to enter the cell. And we need this because we have to produce energy. So people that need insulin are primarily type 1 diabetics, and they don't produce any insulin at all. Or if they do, they produce very little of it, and then their cells are not even responding. Now I said not responding, not like some of the doctors say, where they say that they are destroyed. They're not destroyed. So we're going to talk about that in just a moment. But those who are type 2 diabetics, they usually have a sensitivity where it affects their metabolism of their blood sugar, and that's known as insulin resistance. So when the type 2 diabetic eats a high glycemic meal, like up here, they start off with a high blood sugar meal, then it becomes accumulative in their body, where technically the type 2 diabetes is a metabolic syndrome. And this is a eating disorder or eating habit or eating addiction. It can be reversed. Now what really controls this blood sugar? It is our pancreas, of course. Our pancreas is the only organ in our body that can be an endocrine gland or an exocrine gland. And it sits right behind our stomach, where they secrete this pancreatic juice. The pancreatic juice flows down through this pancreatic duct right here, and then it enters the duodenum, where they can be now mixed with the bile into the small intestine, and they can break down our food. But inside of that pancreatic juice, there is these digestive enzymes. And those are trypsin, amylase, protease, catalase, and they're there to help break down our food. Now, inside of the pancreas, there are these cluster cells named the islet cells, the pancreatic islets. Sometimes they used to call it the islets of Langerhans. And they have two main cells in them called the alpha cells and the beta cells. Now, the alpha cells are responsible for secreting a protein hormone called glucagon. Glucagon can be stored inside of the liver and waits there until we run out of glucose. And it's stored as a polysaccharide, so glucose can then convert into it, and it can be released. And this is an interchangeable type of thing that the alpha cells and the beta cells kind of work together. Now, mainly, we use our beta cells to secrete the insulin, so they can go into our tissues and then produce energy, go into our organs, produce energy. But the insulin has the ability to allow glucose in excess to be stored in the liver as glucagon. So they work pretty much hand in hand. Now, how do you get these type of conditions, or how do you obtain these imbalances? As we get more into depth of this, I don't really want to confuse anyone. We're going to try to stay on one thing at a time. So we're going to talk about type 1. There is a genetic component that goes on with type 1 diabetes. Now, some people may obtain type 1 by going through the stages of type 2, where they need insulin in order to live. But the genetic component actually only happens within 5% of the population. And most of the time, we are unaware that our mother or our father could have carried the gene that on the 6th chromosome that is basically susceptible to a virus in the cow's milk. Now, when we were little or while we were in the womb, we could have been exposed to cow's milk. And this is what makes us become type 1 diabetic or a juvenile diabetes. And it slips through the cracks of the pasteurization process. This virus is called a bovine enterovirus. And it slips through the cracks of it, and it paralyzes these beta cells here. Now, I did say that it was not destroyed. It's basically paralyzed where they cannot respond. So that will mean there are type 1 diabetes around the age of 7 to 12. And they have to inject themselves with insulin in order to live. So now that you know the cause of type 1, what do I mean by paralyzed? I mean, the doctors are not telling you, but the beta cells can be blocked by scarring. So let me explain. When you eat too much glucose at one time, it can break down the beta cells over time. Now, high glucose in the blood results in increased glycosylation of vascular proteins and lipids. And it's usually found in the endothelium and the arteries. Now, this is the perfect time so I can teach you about AGE. That's AGE. Stands for Advanced Glycation End Products. These are the proteins and lipids that become glycated, meaning they bond together from the overexposure of sugars in blood. Now, this is the major factor of aging, and it's also one of the major factors of degenerative diseases like diabetes and chronic kidney disease, atherosclerosis, and even Alzheimer's disease. Now, let me show you how this works. Now, when you eat food, the pancreas is going to release its enzymes to help break down that food. But once we are inside of the small intestines, this brush border allows the enterocytes to absorb the glucose so that they can enter these cells. But if you want to go back to the digestive health lecture, please go back and refer about how this system actually works. But I blew this up right here to show you that these glucose molecules, once they are in the bloodstream, they are looking for insulin to help them guide into the cell. That way they can produce the ATP that is needed, and then we have the energy that is needed. That's a normal person. So the red structures here actually represent our glucose. These are our glucose. This is outside the cell. This is outside. And this is inside. And these are our insulin receptors. Now, they're looking for the blue, which is the insulin. They're looking for that to bind to it, and they can bring them into the cell. So, any normal person, this would happen. But when we have a type 1 diabetic, they have to prepare before they eat. At least 20 to 30 minutes where they can take their insulin before, and then they can eat. But if they don't, then this here, all this glucose will be floating around in the bloodstream. And it will probably damage their blood vessels, it will damage their nerves, and it also damage their organs. So whatever the amount that the doctor has prescribed you, I know from my experience, they usually give a 1,000 milliliter vial of insulin, and you can take that up to 12 units per day. That's when you're starting off. And then that lasts probably about 3 months. But the problem here in type 1 is that these cells are missing. They are missing their insulin receptors. There's only a few of them. So if they're missing the insulin receptors, the insulin can't find it. So they're left with a whole lot of glucose floating around in the bloodstream, and this produces these glycated proteins. And the more receptors that are missing, the more glucose is going to be needed, because it's looking for one or two of them that's on the cell. So when it gets to the point where you're like 60 units a day, that's when you're going to need dialysis. And we don't want that happening. So what I've pretty much discovered with my diabetic clients is that they have a signaling problem. And it's because of the scarring that the glycated proteins have created. They need a way to create lysis, meaning they break apart that bilayer or that scarring or that fibrin that's around those endotheliums. So the way we do this, or the way I do this, is to give my clients the proteolytic enzymes to help break down that bilayer. And if you want to know more suggestions about it, now I advise you to contact me for a consultation. Now let's talk about type 2 diabetes. Now many of the people may think that type 2 diabetes is all about glucose metabolism, but they forget that insulin is actually a hormone. And we know that hormones affect the entire endocrine system. Now, I did say that the pancreas is an endocrine gland and an exocrine gland. One well-known complication that you know that how insulin affects your hormone system is when a woman can't have children. We know this to be as a PCOS, it's polycystic ovarian syndrome, and they will also be insulin resistant. And insulin affects the whole hormonal system. It has to keep the rest of the hormones in balance. So insulin is one thing you have to be very, very mindful of. So as long as the pancreas produce enough insulin, your body will use it properly and it will keep it at a healthy range. So I want to point out that when there is a high amount of glucose in the system, we know that it's hypoglycemia. And these things are going to mess with our nerves, cause nerve damage, neuropathy. It's going to mess with our kidneys, kidney damage. People that I got so much information that I want to tell you guys, because metformin has been shown in studies after 5 to 6 years of use, you're going to end up with some kidney damage. So please find a way, which I have a way that you can do this naturally. When there is eye problems, people with eye problems, when there's too much glucose in the system, they end up with things like retinopathy. And I found that high blood sugar is very common for people that have chromium deficiencies in their pancreas, and that's related also to retinopathy. So when there is too little glucose in the system, it's called hypoglycemia, and that make you feel very irritated really, really fast. People that get hungry, because it irritates them really fast. Or they feel tired, feel that chronic fatigue syndrome sets in. And also they will have a lot of brain fog and confusion because the blood sugars are low. And I found that you may even experience a loss of consciousness with low blood sugars. Now remember that I said that glucose is looking for insulin to guide them. Well, yes, that's true, but our red blood cells don't even need insulin to uptake it, because we have other transporters. And these transporters I want to talk about is that they're going to be able to take the glucose where it needs to go, where it needs to be at fastest. So the brain needs to be able to get it really, really fast. We use these glucose transporters, crosses the blood-brain barrier. And one thing you should realize, that type 2 diabetics, they become lightheaded really fast, or they get really dizzy when they wake up. That's because the glucose hasn't refueled in certain areas of the brain. And the brain will try to get the most glucose out of everything. It's trying to take up at least 20% of your glucose every single minute, So it's there to think. We have to have it. So it'll take up anything else before the rest of your body will because this is what making us move. So we have glucose transporter 2, which has to take all the glucose to our liver cells, our pancreas cells. There's a reciprocation going on with our liver with the glucose 2 transporter, and the small intestines. Like I said, the enterocytes has a way to take the glucose where it needed as well. Group 3 handles our brain, neurons, and sperm, and group 4 handles our skeletal muscles. We have to be able to move, and our adipose tissues. And this is our extra fat that's on our body and the fat around our heart. See, the adipose tissues have a lot to do with diabetics because it's being refueled, and these are how glucose is getting burned off fast. It's how it's metabolizing, it's growing. You find a lot of obese diabetics because of this group 4 transporter is handling most of your glucose. Group 1, group 2, group 4 is all seen in type 2 diabetics. And we have over 10 different glucose transporters. Some of them are sodium transporters, but I'm not going to talk about all that here. But just know that sodium is also needed. So you'll find some type 2 diabetics with high blood pressure because some of those sodium receptors or sodium glucose transporters are not working efficiently. So I know you want to get rid of diabetes, and I have a protocol treatment on my website that you can check out. It's there to help you out for 30 days to basically balance out all of your blood sugars. When you know that you're hitting close to that 100 mark, you know that you're in great ranges. And I thought that I may have the time to talk about all the different ranges and what's normal, but just know if you're over 140, you're definitely type 2 diabetic. Under that, you could be pre-diabetic, and healthy ranges are between are at 100. Check out that protocol. I want you guys to eat clean, eat a live food diet. Fruits and vegetables is what's going to help you, and stay away from the animal fats because those things are creating the glycated proteins inside your system. So that's it, y'all people. Until next time, I want to thank you guys for listening, and let's go heal each other. God bless.